The advice and opinions expressed by the host of Autism Live and her guests are meant solely as suggestion and should not be in any way construed as child-specific advice. Any choices you make in determining your child's treatment are completely at your own discretion.
Good morning and welcome to Autism Live. I'm Shannon Penrod and very excited to be with you this morning. We got a lot that we're going to talk about this morning and a lot that we're going to do. We're going to be joined by a really amazing guest later on in the show. Dr. Eric Weiss is going to be with us. I know originally we thought he was going to be joined by his wife as well because they are co-authors. I can speak, co-authors is what I want to say, of a book called Educating Marsden, Marsden being their son. And Dr. Weiss is here predominantly to talk with us today about the use of stem cells for treating autism. We're specifically talking about umbilical cord stem cells being used to treat autism. I know I'm just gonna ask everybody to take a deep breath before we go on. I know that this is a very controversial subject for a lot of people, and people have thoughts and feelings. And I will say this again: we're not endorsing this on the show or on the network, but you know that the words that we live by is that we want to give you information. We're all about information and inspiration. In this case, it's about the information. You decide if you're inspired. Yeah. Because we do have a responsibility to talk about research and things that are going on. So Dr. Weiss will be here a little bit later on. We'll tell you all about him, and he'll tell you about why this is near and dear to his heart. So, okay, all good. Everybody's good. Right now, we're premiering this show. It's coming to you live right now for the first time. We did pre-record this, but I'm probably watching along. I have jury duty coming up, so this is why we're recording stuff. But take a look on the screen. You can see all the different ways that you can watch the show. Please write in and ask any questions that you have along the way. I will make sure that your questions get answered. That is my pledge to you. But our fabulous Chris Desmond is showing you some of the different ways that you can be watching the show, some of the different ways that you can listen to the show in podcast. We know that some of you watch on YouTube because you like to see if I'm having a bad hair day. Bless you, right? And you love to see the shining faces of our guests and the faces that I make. It's all good. But many of you are listening in podcasts to the show. We also enjoy that too. Whatever way gets the content to you is what we want you to find, right? Because otherwise, what are we doing? And many of you have said you really enjoy listening in podcasts. So that is a free download for you wherever you get your podcasts. So hopefully you subscribe so that it automatically, whenever we do a new show, it'll automatically go to your inbox. We really encourage that. But some of you have written in and said, hey, I really love the podcast thing, but I don't love getting ads. And that is a reality of the free download. When you get it for free, it means that there are going to be ads because obviously, first of all, there's a little bit of we have to pay for the lights to be on. But more than that, I don't know if you guys know this, when you download a free podcast, it's not free. Somebody has to pay a small fee for that. So we defray that cost, but with the sponsors. And we love the sponsors who sponsor all of our shows. But if you don't, and you may not, because some of you have said, I'm running, I don't want to listen to an ad. So you don't have to. If you're willing to pay a small fee every month, and it's $5 a month, you get everything on the Autism Network. Everything. Ask Dr. Doreen, Autism Live, Stories from the Spectrum. You get Today's Hyperfixation. You get all the things. Let's Talk Movies. All of them for $5 a month, which is a pretty good deal, right? So you can do that by going to glow.fm/autism-live. There it is on the screen, glow.fm/autism-live, $5 a month, and you get everything that we do, and you get it ad-free, and it shows up right in your inbox. And those of you who do that tell me that you love that and it works well. I do want to tell you too that if you pay for it across a year, like you just Instead of doing a monthly subscription, you pay the year, you get a discount. It's less than $5. I don't know exactly how much it is, but I know it's less. Okay, so wonderful. I want to take a second to talk about the jargon of the day. This is something that we've been doing for a while here because I don't know about you, but the jargon sometimes is a little too much for me, right? And in every industry, they have jargon terms, and it's like they keep making new ones, right? And, I walk through my life and I use the words that I use. I love words. And so, I'll find a new word and I love to use it. But it kind of makes me crazy when you walk into some place specifically because you have someone that you love and adore on the autism spectrum that you're trying to help support them, right? And you walk in the door to some place, whether it's some kind of a therapeutic provider or it's school, and they start talking to you about the person that you love, and they're using terms that like you've never heard of before. Sometimes they're terms that they invented, right? I'm a former school teacher, and yet I would go to school and they would say these things and I would go, what does that mean? Oh, we just invented that. That stands for, oh, please, right? Whatever. It used to tear my ticket. So when we started the show, we're in the 14th year now. I said, I want to do jargon of the day. So we shed some light and we don't have to all feel like we failed in life because we don't know these terms. So today's jargon term is perseverate. Now, I don't know about you, but in my regular day-to-day life and all the things that I was doing before my job was on the autism spectrum, it's not that I never heard this word. I just never heard people use it in a sentence just for walking around. And I remember once going to a presentation about autism, and the person who was leading the presentation, the expert that was leading the presentation, was giving us candy throughout the presentation to kind of keep everybody happy and peppy. And you would answer a question and, she would throw candy in this place. And then she said to me, not to me, she said to the whole group, she said, oh, now you're all perseverating on the candy. And I thought, who uses these terms in a sentence like just in your regular day life? Well, you know what? Occasionally now I do. I use the word perseverate in a sentence. It's like I've gone to the dark side. And it's not that I want you to go to the dark side, but I want you to understand what it means because it may be something that you're dealing with. And I think that that's an important thing. Now, it used to be that we only gave you the actual definition and then we gave you a working definition. And now we've been playing with giving you the definition from AI. So let's take a look at perseverate and let's look at what the Google AI definition is. Perseveration is a key diagnostic criterion for autism spectrum disorder, but it can also affect people with other conditions. Perseveration is when somebody gets stuck on an idea or a topic and may repeat words, phrases, or actions over and over. It can also involve rumination and worry. Okay, I do want to say that this is only the beginning part of the definition for Google AI, but I thought this was a good place to start. I love that it says that, this is one of the specific things that is looked at for autism. However, it does not define autism, and that you can have perseveration without having a diagnosis of ASD. Okay, so let's move on to our other definition, which is from Understood, which I really super love some of their definitions because they kind of jargon it down so that it's easier for me to get a gripster on, and I hope for you as well. Their definition is perseveration is when someone, quote unquote, gets stuck on a topic or an idea. You may have heard the term in regard to autism, but it can affect others too. People who perseverate often say the same thing or behave in the same way over and over again, but they can get stuck on their emotions, actions, and thoughts too. And they do it past the point where it makes sense or will change anything. Now, this last part for me really drills down on it because stop and think. Now, the first example I want to give, if you've ever watched Big Bang Theory, right? And what does Sheldon do when he goes and knocks on a door? He has a ritual that he knocks a certain number of times. It's, knock, knock, penny, knock, knock, penny. And it drives her crazy because sometimes she'll answer the door after the first one. She doesn't want him to do it the 5 times. And he says, could you close the door? I'm not done yet. And so it is no longer this thing that he was doing was to get her attention, but now it has become a perseveration that it must be done 5 times. And it has gone past the point of where it's functional because Penny's already answered the door. He still needs to do it. It's like a compulsion, right? He's got to do it. There was a young gentleman that I knew when I was teaching that I don't know why I said young gentleman. He was an older gentleman, but he had a traumatic brain injury. And he would, if anybody said anything about horses, he would then get in a loop and he couldn't get himself out. Like it would almost be that he had to go to bed and go to sleep so that he could get the record unstuck from that groove. And it was one of those things where everybody, I was doing educational programs in the place that he lived, and everybody on staff was told, don't bring up horses around him. It's unkind, right? Because he can't get himself out. So that's a perseveration. It's when you cannot, it's not a choice. And you cannot get yourself unstuck. And I really want to focus on that for just a second, because there are some times when I think this gets misused, right? When somebody's passionate about something and they're joyful about something, that's not perseveration, right? That's a choice. I like that. I'm excited. I'm thrilled about that. I love fireworks, man. And I'm happy to go to a fireworks show and I want to sit there and I absolutely love it and I'm joyful about fireworks. I will jump up and down like a small child because I love fireworks. But I am not perseverating on fireworks because I can stop talking about fireworks. When I have that level of control. Now, when somebody gets excited about something and they have a favorite topic that they like to talk about, it isn't necessarily a perseveration. Perseveration should be shared for when it's no longer the choice. And I think that that's a really important distinction to make, especially for those of us who love somebody on the spectrum. Let's please let them have the thing that they love and enjoy, but let's also help them to be able to shift their focus onto other things so that they're not stuck in a loop that's all they can do. We've all been there, right? I used to do quite a bit of editing. Our fabulous Chris Desmond does that now. And I found it very hard to let go of what I was editing, especially if it was something with a piece of music. Oh my gosh, for days it would be an earworm and I just could not stop singing that song, right? We've all had this to some degree. We can all be compassionate about it, but please don't confuse it when somebody is totally joyfully, happily excited about something that is their particular thing. We want to be careful. We don't want them to get stuck there, but let's let them be excited about things as well. Okay, so in just a minute, we're going to be joined by our very special guest today, Dr. Eric Weiss, who's going to be talking with us about stem cell treatment for autism. Specifically, we're going to be talking about umbilical cord stem cells. And he'll help us to define that. But before we do that, we want to show you a promo for our upcoming All Ghouls Gala. There are still tickets. Go to the site that's on the promo. I do want to say that sometimes these promos are a little bit scary. So if you have small children, this is not the moment for them to watch. But if you're going to be in the Los Angeles area, I really encourage you. Join us at the All Ghouls Gala. The tickets are very low cost for what you get. It's a star-studded evening. I will be there. Dr. Grant Boucher will be there. Chris Desmond will be there. And plus a bunch of celebrities and influencers and wonderful, wonderful people. It is costumes mandatory. And there's a big costume contest. It's so much fun. So take a look at this, and then we'll be back with Dr. Eric Weiss.
It's that time of year. when the fear of missing out overcomes you? Well, at ACT today, we would rather light a candle in your window than curse your darkness. Because tickets for the 3rd annual All Ghouls Gala are now on sale. It's time for you to get all dolled up. There will be drinks, dancing, and plenty of food. Head on over to 3rd annual All Ghouls Gala at eventbrite.com to get your tickets now. And remember, the only thing better than one ticket is 2. So bring a friend.
Welcome back. I'm so excited to welcome for the first time to the show Dr. Eric Weiss. As we mentioned at the beginning of the show, we're going to be talking about some very interesting topics, and I know that some of you will have some opinions and some reactions. I want to make sure that I remind everybody that we're here to get information. Our goal always is information and inspiration, but we're looking for information today. Want to remind everyone that Dr. Weiss, and I'm going to tell you his bio, very respected physician and surgeon, that we're not endorsing Dr. Weiss, and we're just getting some good information here that I think you guys will be interested in. Let me tell you about him, though. He is a graduate of Duke University Medical School. He has completed his general surgery residency at the University of California and a plastic and reconstructive surgery residence at the University of Miami. He is a board-certified plastic and reconstructive surgery physician of the American Board of Plastic Surgery. He is also a fellow in the American College of Surgeons. So this gentleman is no slouch. He is also a leader in advanced regenerative medicine. He is the co-author of Educating Marsden, which he co-wrote with his wife. Founder of the North Florida Stem Cell Clinic, Dr. Weiss provides stem cell replacement therapy to treat various conditions such as osteoarthritis, rheumatoid arthritis, and traumatic brain injury, with a special focus on the treatment of autism, which is what we're going to be talking about today. As I mentioned, he and his wife wrote a memoir of their journey through programs and therapies to improve the quality of life for their son. They tried repeatedly many different things, and I'm going to put words into his mouth, but ask him, but we're a little bit frustrated that they were not seeing the progress that they wanted to see. But now Marsden, we're very happy to report, is someone that while previously he had limited verbal communication, has the ability to hold a conversation and ever so much more. You can check out Educating Marsden. It is dedicated to parents that are on a mission to help their children and to spread the word about stem cell replacement therapy as a treatment for autism. Okay, so having said that, and I know everybody's having thoughts, opinions, and emotions, but let's bring in Dr. Weiss so he can share with us what he has experienced and what he knows, and then we'll ask a lot of questions. So Dr. Weiss, first of all, thank you for taking the time to be with us.
It's nice to be here.
I want to start by let's get some clarity here. Let's talk specifically about umbilical cord stem cells. What are they, and what should we know about those in general?
Okay, well, it's hard to believe that umbilical cord blood stem cells are adult stem cells. And if you look at the world of stem cells, you have embryonic stem cells, which are designed to make a baby. And then there's umbilical cord blood stem cells, which are adult stem cells, which are designed to heal. So about midway through the second trimester, the fetus is completely formed. It just starts to grow. So that's when the cells become not embryonic, but adult stem cells. So adult stem cells have been used in medicine, especially in the United States, for almost 60 years. There's 80 different diseases that these cells have been known to treat and improve function in human life. And so autism, being used for autism, is new to stem cells, but stem cells, especially umbilical cord blood stem cells, are not new to medicine.
All right, I'm going to start by asking some questions that are not going to be very educated. So forgive me, but because this already we're into territory that I didn't know. So, but for umbilical cord stem cells, are those specific to the baby, or are they specific to the mother, or is it a combo platter?
They're specific to the baby.
Okay. Okay.
And so, yeah, the whole maternal baby complex is very unique. Just how do you get a foreign body living inside a mom and not have it rejected? And so it's a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. My sister used to say to me all the time when I was pregnant, I would say, I'm so tired. And she would say, because you have an alien who's sucking all of the food and energy out of you. That's what's happening. Wake up and smell the coffee. And it did feel that way, but boy, did I love that little alien. Okay, so we've identified then that these are very specific adult cells. How is this being, and you mentioned that it's being used for a lot of other things, but now, they forayed in, you have forayed in treating autism. How does this work and what does it do? And give us the full 411.
Okay, so, I think everybody understands that the rate of autism has been increasing. Yeah. And the NIH realized that too. And so they commissioned an autopsy study. So they were looking for fresh brains in people with autism that died from obviously other causes, from car accidents to house fires to drownings to cancer to all sorts of other stuff. And what they found out when they did autopsies on these fresh brain specimens is that 90% or more had brain inflammation. And brain inflammation in specific areas of speech, language, and socialization. They followed that study up with children who were alive and did spinal taps on them. And what they found out is these living children, and when they looked at their spinal fluid, also had the same inflammatory markers in their spinal cord. So that was the first time that we really could say, autistic brains are different from normal brains, and they're different in this way. They have less connections in the speech and language area. They have, less connections in the behavior area. And it's probably related to this information. And this fit a very nice concept because what we've finding out at the same time was that Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's disease, multiple sclerosis, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, traumatic brain injury, and spinal cord injury all had brain inflammation or neuroinflammation at their heart. And the brain injury people were actually the ones that discovered that stem cells helped because they were looking at why you can get hit in the head and have a concussive blow or a subconcussive blow, and 20 years later, be 30 times more likely to have dementia. And what they showed was that the brain injury set up some inflammation, and that inflammation never ended. It kept growing. It kept gobbling up brain cells until the brain didn't work properly. And they discovered that these cells in umbilical cord blood could not only turn off brain inflammation, but turn on brain restoration. Mm. And as soon as they discovered that, the people from Duke did a study with cerebral palsy, because cerebral palsy has a huge inflammatory component. And they showed that 88% of the kids that got umbilical cord blood had better functioning. And then they followed that up with their kind of famous autism study, where they found that 60% of the kids got significantly better. And through objective measurements, their EEG showed more brain power. Their MRIs showed more connections. And through kind of sophisticated objective means, their socialization improved. So it was the very first time where they correlated, a treatment, and the brain started moving towards normal.
I remember when those studies came out, because we started talking about it here on the show. And I was talking about this interview this morning with somebody, and I said, I don't know why. I remember it was many years ago where everybody was so excited and said, we're going to see much, much more of this, of treating autism and other things with stem cells. And I know probably 6 years ago, a friend of mine had stem cell procedure instead of getting her knee replaced. And she said to me, oh, in 5 years' time, no one will ever get a knee replacement again. Like things are going to move like lightning speed. And yet here we are, and I don't know what the stumbling block is. Is there anything that you can share with us about why, after those two particular studies, the one showing that 60% of the kids had improvement, why isn't this being talked about much more? I know you're here talking about it, and you're not chopped liver, but why isn't this much more mainstream than I thought it would be now? And do you feel that way too? Did you feel like, oh, this is going to be everywhere?
Oh, yes. Well, if you talk to people and say there are autopsy studies of kids with autism, and they have this problem, their brains aren't normal, they have inflammation in this area, and we're now trying to find something to treat the inflammation, and we believe we found it. So I think there's a couple reasons for why it hasn't caught on like wildfire.
Okay.
The first is that discovery was made in 2019, right before the pandemic. Wow. And that kind of shut down a lot of research, and we're still recovering from that. So that would be one issue. The second issue is these cells come from a living person, and these cells are living cells, and they're injected into somebody as living cells. And so, AIDS can be transmitted, hepatitis can be transmitted, Zika can be transmitted, CMV, cytomegalovirus, all sorts of other, West Nile. So it is a biologic that needs to really be regulated, looked at, and treated in a very special way, because there have been people who have gotten umbilical cord blood in the United States before the FDA really took over, that were infected with hepatitis B.
Oh dear.
And so about 2 years ago, the FDA made umbilical cord blood a drug, not a transplant, and then kind of took over the reins, for regulation. And so that has put a kind of a tamp down enthusiasm, because pharmaceutical companies don't have a lot of biologic divisions. And so, ramping that up will take some time. And then I think the third thing is the follow-up Duke study showed that there wasn't a benefit as a whole in their study. However, there were some issues with the study, and they had an abnormal amount of kids with an intellectual disability, which is not usually seen in autism. And if they ruled the kids out that had severe intellectual disabilities, then it did show a benefit. And so I think we're still kind of learning how to use these cells, and that just takes time.
Interesting. Very, very interesting. So let's back up the bus for just a second and talk about your son. And I'd love for you to tell us, because I always want to defer to individuals and to their parents, for we all have different words to describe where we are on the spectrum and where the individuals are that we love on the spectrum. So tell us a little bit about Marsden, and maybe you've written a wonderful memoir about your journey with Marsden, but give us a little bit of a Reader's Digest, and then tell us where to get the book, right? But about where you started and where you are now.
Well, he has an older brother that kind of hit all his milestones, and we thought we were the best parents in the world because we didn't do anything. Mm-hmm. And then we have an adopted son, a godson, that we saw grow up as well. And then when Marsden was born, he just wasn't hitting his milestones. He wasn't talking, he wasn't communicating well, he wasn't following commands. He didn't have great eye contact. And at that time there was no internet. And so we just, started to seek out information, and we went from everywhere from Boston Children's Hospital all the way down to Miami's Children's Hospital. And he got the diagnosis at Miami Children's Hospital. And then it was a lifelong journey of trying to make him better. Every month we try to assess his strengths and weaknesses. We tried a bunch of different therapies. ABA hadn't been invented yet, so we were doing something called floor time that Dr. Greenspan, wrote about, circles of communication, things like that. But my wife became the FBI investigator looking for all the new therapies, and I became the guy that would vet them. Did they make sense? And so, our lives changed, when the Duke study came out, because as soon as we saw there was pathology that was known and a way to treat it, that made sense to me because, through my, I guess, treating patients as a physician, there were two patients that stood out. I had a young man with a devastating brain injury, open cranium, brain pouring out, that was taken emergently to the operating room. The neurosurgeons probably took out at least a third of his brain. He was in a coma afterwards. I spoke with his parents and kind of lost follow-up because he was transferred out of the hospital still in a coma. And then 2 years later, I read in the newspaper that he graduated from college. And so I called the neurosurgeons and they said, 2 months, he kind of woke up. And his only deficit was a little mild weakness of his left arm. But cognitively, he was intact. Everything was intact. And I kind of figured if the brain has enough plasticity to figure out how to work when a third of it's gone, why can't my son's brain work when it's all there?
Yeah.
But I had another very similar patient. And it's been shown that if your brain's inflamed and it's not working properly, it limits the plasticity. So to me, it just made sense to eliminate the inflammation and let the brain heal itself. And that's how this whole thing started. The first thing I did was I called Duke. I was at Duke when the lead researcher was there. And I know people there. And so I got her on the phone and she told me she had seen, amazing results, but, they couldn't treat Marsden because he was too old. And, I asked why, what does age have to do with it? And they weren't quite sure, but they were seeing their results in children 8 and under. Then I called Panama and they wouldn't treat them as well because they were seeing results in younger kids. And so finally my wife found a doctor in Chicago, Thomas Loeb, world-class pediatric surgeon. He was the head of St. Jude's Children's Hospital surgery department for decades. And he was doing a pediatric brain injury study where he had seen some amazing results. And the more I talked to him, the more he said, we had people in common that trained us. He said, come on up to Chicago, let's do it and see what happens. And, to say it was night and day is an understatement. He had more gains in a year than he had in, 20 years prior.
So
and that's how
old was Marsden? I'm sorry for interrupting. How old was Marsden then? And you did the stem cell therapy with him? Right.
He was 22 years old
22.
when he got it.
Okay.
And so, after two treatments over a year, Dr. Loeb said, he's the oldest patient at the hospital. We need to, they're looking at me funny. And so what I did was, he's the one that kind of got me into this, showed me how to do it, introduced me to the people where he was sourcing his cells. And, that I wanted to make sure everything was perfect for my son.
Yeah.
And so, I interviewed various labs. I traveled and visited labs, met with chief scientific officers, and ended up with a lab called STEML, which I believe was head and shoulders above most. And they've recently been acquired by a pharmaceutical company because the FDA made these things a drug. But the people who run the lab are still in charge. And I believe they offer a quality product with all the checks and balances that the FDA requires. And I've seen some amazing results. And, I don't advertise this, the YouTubes and the TikToks were put up by patients.
Yeah.
And my niece eventually got me to do some YouTube, just, patient education. But, this is growing into a full-time job for me. And I'm kind of, winding down surgery, winding this up. And I've seen amazing results. And it's a complete circle for my life to help, other people that were like me. We're all members of a club we didn't want to join,
Yeah.
Parents of autistic children.
So I have a bunch of questions for people who are interested. And first of all, if they want to know more about your journey with Marsden, where can they get Educating Marsden? Is it available in all the major booksellers?
Yeah, all major booksellers, Amazon, just Educating Marsden. Uh, I think paperback, hardcover, as well as ebook.
There we go. So you guys can check that out. And if they want to get a hold of you, because they want to know more about your practice, tell them a little bit about where you're based and how they could find you on the web.
Okay, I'm in Orange Park, Florida, which is a suburb of Jacksonville, Florida. And northfloridastemcells.com or ericweissmd.com. ericweissmd.com is my plastic surgery website, but northfloridastemcells.com is the regenerative side. And I believe this will be the biggest advancement in medicine since antibiotics, because as antibiotics took care of the kind of the infectious diseases, nobody's dying of measles, mumps, rubella, strep, diphtheria, pertussis, all those things, because we have effective treatments for them. But then there was the rise of chronic diseases, from congestive heart failure to stroke to the neurodegenerative disorders, autism. And these cells seek out inflammation in your body, and they work by an amazing thing called paracrine activity. They nestle up to the abnormal cell, they release a little packet that gets absorbed by the abnormal cell, and it corrects its behavior and makes it become normal. And it's really
That's fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. So talk a little bit about the logistics of it, as both a parent who's gone through this with your adult child and as somebody who actually is doing this treatment. Is this a thing? I know for my friends that have done stem cells on different parts of their body that, they had anesthesia and that, the things were injected. Is it the same for all different types? Talk about the procedure.
It's given IV. It's a simple IV. It's a little anticlimactic. My background before I became a plastic surgeon, I was on my way to becoming a transplant surgeon. So, when you put a heart, a lung, a liver, a kidney in somebody, and the organ comes in on ice and it's a big operation, it's amazing. But this is a transplant just the same. But it's an IV.
So you don't have to go to sleep.
What?
So you don't have to have anesthesia and go to sleep.
Not at all. Not at all. However, most kids, with autism are very scared. So I would probably say 80% of the kids that I see, I sedate.
Okay.
I think one of the benefits of me is not only do I have an autistic kid, but I've also been a surgeon for the last 35 years. And so I sedate people all the time, and it's very easy. The office is certified for sedation. I have the monitors. So we sedate the child. If needed, we start the IV. The whole process takes about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. As the child wakes up, we take the IV out. We watch them for about another 30 minutes, and then they're out the door. So the whole, I would say, visit is about an hour and 15 minutes.
And you mentioned that you had done this more than once with Marsden. When you're treating patients, how often do you need to do this?
The Duke study demonstrated that gains continue for 6 months and then plateau. And they followed those children for a year afterwards, and they never went down. And that's because the brain has changed structurally. So it makes sense to me to treat, every 6 months to a year. So we treated Marsden. He got noticeably better. He started asking questions. He started, making sentences. He started using pronouns. He started voluntarily just talking. He called his cousin on the phone once, and he never used a cell phone before.
Did you just freak out? Were you and your wife just freaking out when this happened?
I didn't hear the question.
When this was going on, were you and your wife just freaking out when he?
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable. He had poured syrup on his pancakes for 20 years and looked up and said, "Where does syrup come from?" Just like he had been thinking about it all morning, And then, of course, I explained, your mom's from the Northeast. You find a maple tree and you cut a hole in it and, hang a pail and all that kind of crazy stuff.
Wow.
But so it makes sense to treat at 6 months to a year. But there's never been a study done in the United States or anywhere that I'm aware of multiple treatments. In the United States, a phase 1 study, is it safe? A phase 2 study, does it work? A phase 3 study, dosage and administration. In a phase 4 study, is this better than anything currently on the market? Mm-hmm. So phase 1 studies have been done. Is it safe? Phase 2 studies are in process, and phase 3 are just starting. And then really nobody knows the exact dosage, because, if a child doesn't respond, the question is, did they not get enough cells? Do they need a second dose? There's a lot of other questions that need to be answered. Maybe they have a genetic, issue more than an inflammatory based issue. These are all questions that have to be answered.
And I love that we feel that the answer to the question, is it safe, has already been answered. But, forgive me for, asking a layman question, but if we don't know what the dosage is it possible that a child could get too much? I know we've already talked about what happens if you get too little, but do we know what happens if you get more than you need? Is it like vitamin C and your body just flushes it out? What happens?
That's a good question. Right now, we're kind of staying in parameters of how many cells per kilogram per child. Like anything in life, if you drink too much water, it can be fatal. So I think, judgment has to take place. If you put these cells, let's just look at, the studies are done in experimental animals. But if you put human umbilical cord blood cells, let's say in a puppy, just born puppy, they're healthy, there's no issues, those cells will circulate for 2 years, ready to do something. If you put those cells in an aged animal, an older dog, the cells are all gone within 3 to 6 months because they have arthritis, they have chronic, conditions and stuff like that. These cells were actually studied in a very unique experiment where they took, isogenic rats, which means the same genetic background, one young, one old, and then they sewed them together, made conjoined twins out of them. And what they did was they saw the older rat get younger. His metabolic function increased. His wounds healed more like a young rat. And so we all have these cells circulating in our bodies, and they migrate to inflammation. So if the inflammation gets taken care of, they will just continue to circulate. But good question. I don't know if I spoke to it, but that's the answer as I see.
But I'm clear on why I could never have been a doctor or researcher, because that's just horrifying to me that they sewed 2 rats together. But I'm sure that people are using that knowledge now, knowing that an older rat can get younger. I don't even want to know what people are going to do with that.
It's an interesting, just the background it was right after World War II during the Cold War, and they were studying radiation injury, and they noticed that if you radiated a young rat, they didn't die like an older rat died. Trying to figure out what's different about a young rat. And what they found out was they have more of these stem cells than old rats. And so they knew something circulated in young animals that gave them youngness as early as the early 1960s. It just took 40 years to figure out what it was.
Fascinating. It's all fascinating, but it hurts my head. And, I don't even like rats, and I want to, hold a memorial for the rats. I'm just a soft touch for that. Okay, so I remember at a certain point in this realm that it wasn't legal, and you couldn't use stem cells to treat autism. You could use it to treat other things. But you could use stem cells if you had banked your child's own cord blood. Now, would you see the same result? Because I know there was a big discussion about for a bunch of us. I remember when they came in an hour after my son was born, and they were like, "Do you want to bank the cord blood?" And it was more money than I could conceive of at that moment, and so we didn't. And I cried about it. I was like, "Oh no, what if we need this?" Would you see the same result from banked cord blood, or does it need to be somebody else's cord blood? And at what point did it change that you could now use cord blood that wasn't yours to treat autism?
Good question. To make a long story short, in one of the Duke studies, they did the patient's own cord blood, they did sibling cord blood, and then they did donor cord blood. Mm-hmm. So you figure the same genes, half the same genes, in completely different genes. And the rate of success was exactly the same. So it doesn't matter if you didn't bank your cells. Okay. I mean, I think it'd be nice always to use bank cells, just because they probably last a little bit longer, and there's some other reasons to do that, but not necessary.
Okay.
Now, illegal is a tough word, meaning it's not legal in the United States to give stems for autism, and that's not true. It's never been true.
Okay.
It is not FDA approved for autism, and
even now, even today.
No, it is still not.
Okay.
Before you can get FDA approval, you have to apply something called an investigational new drug license. And so Duke and a couple other pharmaceutical companies have asked the FDA for the license. But the average time from investigational new drug license to FDA approval is 17 years.
Wow.
So going back to COVID, you probably, you remember ivermectin and all these other drugs that people wanted to use. FDA came down pretty hard on that. And so the FDA has lost a series of court battles. And to make a long story short, the judges say the FDA regulates drug companies. The FDA does not regulate healthcare. Healthcare takes place between doctors and patients. So if you and I agree that umbilical cord blood and its stem cells are safe, they have the ability to help your child, then you and I can make the decision to use it. It's just off-label use. Umbilical cord blood has been approved for many different diseases, in the United States. And so since it's on the U.S. formulary, it's been approved, it's been determined that it's safe, we can use it off-label. And currently, right now, the estimates from the FDA is that 20% of all drugs in the United States are used off-label. So It's just an off-label use of a product.
So I'm guessing your insurance won't cover it then.
Correct. Insurance won't cover it, but I believe it'll be FDA approved, hopefully within 5 years.
Okay.
Because there are very few drugs. Like I said, there's a 60-year experience with umbilical cord blood. So it's been around for such a long time that the amount of data on its safety and what it does is impressive. In fact, UCLA just published a paper where they gave it to people with Alzheimer's, and within 3 months the brain started to grow and the pathology started to go away, the inflammation started to go away. And so it's coming. And there's studies now on Parkinson's disease and ALS. And I think that, there might be an alternative factor or, something from Congress to speed this process up. But it's, like I said before, it'll be the biggest thing for especially neurodegenerative disorders since antibiotics.
Wow. Well, and we're almost out of time here. This is just so fascinating. I still have tons of questions, but you brought up COVID. And there's a big discussion right now about what will COVID have done to the increase of autism. I'd love to get your opinion. What do you think we're going to see?
I would suspect we'll see a rise in autism, and for this fact, when Johns Hopkins published their paper on the autopsy studies, and neuroinflammation was found, and they started to study it, they found out that mothers can transmit this inflammation to their infants. And so what they went back and they looked, in 1964, there was a rubella outbreak in the United States. And what they found out was in the late 64 and 65, there were more autistic kids born than they expected. Then they looked at the Scandinavian literature, and they have national health care, so they have very good literature. And they found out that any mother with a significant viral illness in the first trimester or a bacterial infection in the second trimester like a urinary tract infection, pneumonia, etc., the risk of giving birth to autistic child went up tremendously. So we know now that infections, autism in the mother. In fact, if you look at just birth days, that if the first trimester is in the wintertime, there's a higher incidence of an autistic child being born.
Really?
So all this added up, if the mother got COVID, there'll be a higher risk.
Well, right now what I'm seeing is that the delay, I think there's going to be there's going to be a period of time where it's going to look like it went down because so many people had less access to getting their child diagnosed. So I definitely think that that's going to end up on the back end. There's going to be a lot more 8-year-olds being diagnosed than 4-year-olds because people didn't have access. We live.
Yeah, if I can give you some information, which I think is very good. There's a website called autismnavigator.com, www.autismnavigator.com. It was set up through the Florida State University Medical School, Dr. Weathersby. And it's for people in rural areas or people who have trouble getting a diagnosis. And you can upload videos, you can upload their information, and they'll have their group look at it and come back with recommendations and make a diagnosis through telemedicine.
Wow.
And I give that out to people all the time because I think she's a very smart woman. She's one of the leaders in early diagnosis. And it's a one.
Well, connect me and I'll have her on the show because we do have a lot of people that are just struggling. I think we lost you a little bit there. Let's see if we can get you back because I was just about to say goodbye. While we're waiting to see if he comes back, I want to remind everybody that the name of the book is Educating Marsden, Marston, Marsden. And Dr. Weiss co-wrote that with his wife, Christine Weiss. And you guys can get that on Amazon if you want to know more. And the name of the clinic is the North Florida Stem Cell Clinic. And unfortunately, we're out of time. And I didn't get to say goodbye. But hopefully he'll connect us to that doctor who's doing the early diagnosis. And hopefully, if nothing else, you guys have more questions. I have more questions than we started, but I feel like they're more educated questions. Please write. If you want to write in your questions that you have, I will make sure that they get forwarded to Dr. Weiss. I want to thank everybody for being here and thank Dr. Weiss for taking the time to explain this to us. It's at a very interesting point for things. We are going to be back with more shows, so check out our promos to see what's coming up. But that's it for today. We'll see you next time. Until then, give your kiddos a hug from me and one for you too. Bye-bye for now. If you found anything helpful in this video, please give us a like. In fact, make sure that you smash that subscribe button on YouTube and give us a like on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Instagram for important updates. And please download our free podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much. See you next time.